Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here, no stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.
Coffee. Without it, we would never have had the Industrial Revolution. We'd all be still living in Europe in mud huts. Here in Laredo, we have the Organic Man Coffee Trike. 4501 McPherson, the best coffee on the planet. If you can't get to Laredo, you can order from the Organic Man Coffee Trike.shop. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. I will be at Balcones Heights on August 27th from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., I think. I'm not too sure when the event ends. Maybe longer. The 2022 Wonderland UFO Festival will be held inside the Wonderland Mall of the Americas. If you don't know where Balcones Heights, it's off the 410 loop where I-10 West crosses. It's actually inside San Antonio, but it's its own little city. I'll be there selling my books and listening to the folks I know who will be talking about UFOs. I think I know at least half of the speakers that are going to be there. It's free to get in, and it's air conditioned, which right now that's a pretty important thing. Fun for the whole family. Come on by and listen to the speakers and maybe start your Christmas shopping early. David Subith asked me to look into the Guidestones. Since there's been so much about it on the news here lately, they're all saying pretty much the same thing, though. A lot of people hadn't heard of the Georgia Guidestones until that bomb went off. When I do a show, it usually takes me about 10 or 15 hours to do the research. That's just what it takes. I have to type up my notes and try to sound like I know what I'm saying. This show was a lot longer. There are hundreds of pages on the Guidestones that needed to be sifted through. Many were so far out there that I just kind of passed over them. Others were repetitive articles where the person writing the article simply cut and pasted everything from someone else's page. Didn't even bother to give credit to the people they were copying. I can hand out all kinds of advice. I can tell you just about anything that I think might make your life better. Things like act your wage and stop spending money you don't have. Well, actually, that's Dave Ramsey's advice. He's a interesting man. You should listen to him. Good advice. I can tell you to do things like do your Christmas shopping early so you don't have to wait till December 24th and run out trying to find something for everybody you know. I could say you could buy a book and hand them out to people you know. The books are not that expensive. They don't need batteries. You can sit them on a shelf for years and they're still there when you need them. And if the person you give the book to discovers they don't like it, they can wrap it up and give it to someone else. Who will ever know? Books, they make great gifts. Well, if you choose to listen to me, you can sit back and relax knowing you don't have to run out on the 24th and deal with shopping madness. You can also choose to ignore my advice. It's up to you. After all, it's free. You're not paying for it. And I don't even know if I'm right. Maybe you have other ideas on how to do your Christmas shopping. That's the thing about advice. You listen to it and you go, not for me, or yeah, I think I'll try that. Some folks think that they are so intelligent and high and mighty that their advice has to be followed by us little folks. Now, the Ten Commandments were handed down by God, the big guy. Probably should listen to him. After all, he kind of created everything. 10 commandments that, if you read them, which you should, they make a lot of sense. Like don't murder people and don't steal. Things like that. Good advice, or commands, I should say. Advice from God, it needs to be followed. Advice from some person or persons with an agenda is a whole different thing. 10 suggestions that sound more like 10 new commandments are coming from unknown people. First one was maintain humanity at under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. Guide reproduction wisely, improving fitness and diversity. Unite humanity with a living new language. Rule passion, faith, tradition, and all things with tempered reason. Protect people and nations with fair laws and just courts. Got a cat running around on my desk. Let all nations rule internally, resolving external disputes with a world court. Avoid petty laws and useless officials. That's about half of them at least. Balance personal rights with social duties. Prize truth, beauty, love, seeking harmony with the infinite. Be not a cancer on earth, but leave room for nature. And that one was repeated. Some of these words make a lot of sense. I really would love to see a few of these followed, like rule passion, faith, and tradition in all things with tempered reason. Just because somebody in Washington is being accepting a gift from someone, some self-interest group, doesn't make passing certain laws a good idea. Passing laws simply because they think that it'll get more votes for them. They're not really doing what they believe. They're just trying to keep their jobs. This is complicated by folks who got into positions of power and decide they are entitled to tell the rest of us how to live. Look at the EPA as a very bad example of bad ideas. Protecting the environment was a good idea. It was created by Richard Nixon. Yeah, that guy. However, suddenly the EPA started making all kinds of rules. They were saying that like farmers were being fined for using fertilizer, and that when they would pile up a bunch of cow poo, it was a hazardous site. Same cat, still trying to turn knobs on my mixer over here. Anyway, the EPA had gotten way out of hand. There's 3 branches of government. The legislators are the ones that are supposed to pass the laws. They get together and they vote and they say, yes, this is a good law because I just got $100,000 from the person that wants me to. No, that's not how it's done. Anyway, so legislators, they pass the laws. The executive branch, that's the guy in the White House, are supposed to enforce these laws. They're not supposed to pass them. They're not supposed to make laws for the rest of us, although you'd never know that by the way certain people act. And then there's the judicial guys. They're supposed to decide if these laws that are passed are constitutional. Now, the Constitution isn't all that long or complicated. And yet you'd think, the way some people go about it, it was written in Greek or something. But I'm getting off the point, aren't I? Anyway, there are a few folks who think food is manufactured in some factory somewhere and it winds up on the grocery shelves, and they don't seem to realize that there's a farmer out there that is actually growing this stuff using fertilizer and massing piles of cow poop so we can eat. Shouldn't make laws that make the farmers' lives worse. Protect people and nations with fair laws and just courts. Well, we see this all the time. The elites always get a free pass after breaking laws that the rest of us would get a free all expense paid trip to the Greystone Resort. There seems to be two sets of laws out there, theirs and ours. Let all nations rule internally, resolving external disputes in a world court. This would make the UN even more useless, but, well, they're probably the ones that think they are going to run that court. We need a government that will fit inside the Constitution. My favorite of all is avoid petty laws and useless officials. Boy, wouldn't our government be a lot smaller if that were to happen. Be not a cancer on the earth. Leave room for nature. I can see this being a good idea. My wife and I love to go hiking. And on a few occasions, we've been out hiking and we've found other people's trash on the side of the trail. I guess they never heard the old saying, you pack it in, you pack it out. Well, some people just don't belong out there. Anyway, they're being a cancer on nature. Then there's a bunch of suggestions on the Guidestones that are a bit scary. The very first one is maintain humanity at under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. The stones were first commissioned in 1979. At that time, the world population was 4,380,506,100. I don't know who counted all these people, but that was what they said the population was. So there were already 880,506,100 too many people on the planet. They were already over that number that the Guidestones was referring to. It didn't say what we were supposed to do to cut down on this number. I've heard a few things that, well, if it's true, we're in trouble. The message of the Guidestones was aimed at sustainable development. Anytime you hear the phrase sustainable development used, you should substitute the term for socialism. My cat is bumping up against the camera. That's why it's wobbling. Same cat. Can't get him to move. Neptune. That's his name. Anyway, anytime you hear that, substitute socialism. Socialism sounds good on paper. The trouble is, it doesn't work unless you're one of the top feeders. Now I can't reach the cat too far away. Unless you're in the top position of authority, socialism really sucks. Just ask anyone who lived under it. Over the past 100 years or so, socialism experiments around the world unleashed a vast tide of tyranny, starvation, mass murder on a scale never seen in the history of mankind. Socialism was implemented in the Soviet Union, East Germany, Bulgaria, Hungary, Maoist China, Chavez Madero, Venezuela, and other places. In every one of these places, it failed. Yet, some folks say they think it'll work this time. All those other people, well, they did it wrong. But we can do it better because we're so much smarter than everybody else. Boy, some people have a really big opinion of themselves. The Stones also said, guide reproduction wisely, improving fitness and diversity. Could we call this eugenics? Eugenics is a practice or advocacy of improving the human species by selectively mating people with specific desirable hereditary traits. In other words, somebody else is going to choose who you marry. It aims to reduce human suffering by breeding out disease, disability, and so-called undesirable characteristics from the human population. Early supporters of eugenics believed people inherited mental illness, criminal tendency, and even poverty, and that these conditions could be bred out of the gene pool. In the late 19th century, Francis Galton, whose cousin was Charles Darwin, hoped to better humankind through the propagation of the British elites. We've all looked at those people, and some of them don't look so good. Eugenics in America took a dark turn in the early 20th century, led by California. I'm sure a lot of people have never heard that. Well, from 1909 to 1979, about 20,000 sterilizations occurred in California state mental institutions under the guise of protecting society from the offspring of people with mental illness. Hitler did not come up with the concept of the superior Aryan race on his own. He referred to the American eugenics in his 1934 book, Mein Kampf. My dad had a copy of Mein Kampf, which was written in English. You could get a free copy anytime you bought a Ford that was built in the 30s. I searched the entire house once he was no longer able to live on his own, but I could never find that book. I hope he sold it and not somebody stole it, but it was actually worth some money. It was a first or second edition. I've heard plans were underway in the late 70s to reduce the world population by coming up with diseases that would target specific types of people. Some say this is how AIDS got started. Viruses were being engineered that would only attack people with undesirable traits or habits. Unite humanity with a living new language. We can't even agree on what some words mean. What did that guy say? What the definition of is? That's just a two-letter word. What would the worldwide language be, and who would decide what the words meant? Balance personal rights with social duties. Personal rights should always come first, before social justice. If a mob decides you should no longer own your house, that is under social duties and justice. When Ben Franklin was asked what the difference was between a democracy and a republic, he said a democracy was two wolves and a sheep voting on what was for lunch. A republic was two wolves and one sheep voting while the sheep is holding a shotgun. Mob rule is when 51% of the people decide what is right. That's how slavery got started. That's how Hitler did what he did. We had 10 suggestions on how to run the entire planet. Half of them were mostly to benefit the elites who would hold all the strings. I think by mixing in several really good ideas with a bunch of trash, the folks who came up with the Guidestones figured people reading them wouldn't get upset, at least most folks. Who came up with these 10 suggestions or commandments? 10 commandments like what was handed down to Moses. You do know that Moses was the first person to break all 10 commandments on one day. I hope you don't have to think about that one too hard. Anyway, the Georgia Guidestones were commissioned by a man who called himself Richard C. Christian. Many believe this was a play on Rosicrucians. This is from their own web page. Rosicrucians are a community of philosophers who study and practice the natural laws governing the universe. Our mission is to provide seekers with spiritual wisdom necessary to experience their connectedness with the miraculous world around us and to develop mastery of life. Nowhere on their page did they lay claim to commissioning the Guidestones. I looked. That was a lot of reading. Rosicrucians are members of a worldwide brotherhood claiming to possess esoteric wisdom handed down from ancient times. The name derives from the order's symbol, a rose on a cross, which is similar to the family coat of arms of Martin Luther. Rosicrucian teachings are a combination of occultism and other religious beliefs and practices, including Hermeticism, Jewish mysticism, and Christian Gnosticism. The central feature of Rosicrucianism is the belief that its members possess secret wisdom that was handed down to them from ancient times, like about 2,000 years ago. Christian Rosencreuz was the founder of the group. He was born 1378 and he lived 106 years. After visiting the Middle East and North Africa in search of secret wisdom, he returned to Germany and he organized the Rosicrucian order in 1403. You can see why people would look at the name R.C. Christian and make the connection to Rosicrucians. Were they really involved, or was the name just a red herring to misdirect attention away from the actual creators of the Guidestones? A Christian went to the Elberton Granite Finishing Company in 1979 and said he wanted to build a monument that would send a message to mankind. When Joe Findley, the president of the Granite Company, heard the scope of the project, he told Christian he needed some proof that he'd be able to pay for it. Findley could not start on such a job, which would have been the largest job they had ever done, without some reassurances that it would be paid for. A Christian then went to the local bank. At the bank, he spoke to a banker named Wyatt Martin. He told Martin that Richard Christian was a pseudonym and that he had a private group that had been planning the construction of the Georgia Guidestones for about 20 years. They wished for the entire project to remain strictly anonymous. Wyatt later described Christian as being a well-dressed, well-spoken. He had no reason to believe that this man was insane. Nonetheless, he did need to know what Christian's real name was before he could start the transactions. You don't get a loan at a bank using a fake name. Well, at least you shouldn't. Christian agreed with a few conditions. After completing the transaction, the documents bearing his name were to be destroyed. Wyatt must also sign a document stating he would never reveal Christian's identity to anyone. After agreeing on these terms, Christian set about finding a location for the monument and getting all the details sorted out. Some people believe Christian used Edgar Cayce's map showing how the earth was going to change as a reference to where to build the Guidestones. According to Cayce, the Mississippi River was going to expand far beyond its banks, turning parts of Texas and Arkansas into the river. It was going to submerge most of Louisiana. And sorry, Dave, it looks like you're going to need to move. The West Coast was going to move as far as the Ohio and New Mexico. So we were going to lose a few states out that way. The location of the Guidestones was well away from the tectonic plate movement with zero history of earthquakes. The stones were meant to survive long into the future, possibly beyond some upcoming world disaster. I get this picture in my mind of folks crawling out from under collapsed buildings and wandering about the countryside, and all of a sudden coming across this huge set of granite stones and reading them and saying, "Ah, we have found our way at last." Sounds like something out of a movie. The name of the group Christian represented was never disclosed, nor any of the identities of the folks involved. He did sign a lot of paperwork, and his name was on everything. Once all the money was handed over and the documents written out, construction could begin. Construction on the Guidestones got underway late that summer. Findley's company documented the progress of the work with hundreds of photographs. They show men working on the stones, 114 feet into the rock at the Pyramid Quarry. They were searching for hunks of granite that would be big enough for the stones that were needed to build the monument. A special burner, a narrowly focused rocket motor used to cut and finish large blocks of granite, had to be trucked in to Elberton to clean and size the stones. A pair of master stone cutters were hired to smooth them. You can't just get some kid from the corner store to take a chisel and work on granite. The person doing it has to know what they're doing, because one slip up when 90% of the stone is done could mean you're starting all over. You've got to know what you're doing. Findley and Martin helped Christian find a suitable site for the Guidestones in Elbert County. It was a flat-topped hill rising above the pastures of the Double Seven Farms, with vistas in all directions. For $5,000, owner Wayne Mulinex signed over a 5-acre plot. In addition to the payment, Christian granted lifetime cattle grazing rights to Mulinex and his children, and Mulinex's construction company got to lay the foundation for the Guidestones. A Christian said goodbye to Findley at the Granite Company office, adding, "You'll never see me again." A Christian then turned and walked away, and Findley never did see him again. From then on, Christian communicated solely through Martin, writing a few weeks later to ask that ownership of the land and monument be transferred to Elbert County, which still holds the documents. A Christian reasoned that civic pride would protect it over time. All of Mr. Christian's correspondence came from different cities around the country, Martin said. He never sent anything from the same place twice. This sounds about as weird as a story can get. Why was Christian moving around all the time? The letters all looked to be from the same person, same handwriting. He didn't want anybody to know who he was or where he actually was. A Christian kept in touch with Martin, writing the banker so regularly that they became kind of like pen pals. Occasionally, Christian would call from a payphone at the Atlanta airport, saying that he was in the area, and the two would meet and have dinner. By this time, Martin no longer questioned Christian's secrecy. A lot of people will quickly point a finger at the Illuminati as being behind every major world event. This is probably being done on purpose to keep the real culprits in the shadows. Setting up the Georgia Guidestones began in 1980. Rumors that they were the work of the devil began circulating even before completion of the stone slabs. Communities feared the location would become some sort of a pagan landmark. The rumors began worse following the completion of the monument on March 22, 1980. Some people believed that it was commissioned by the New World Order. Others believed it was set forth the commandments of the Antichrist. Others still said it contained guidelines or advice for survival after the apocalypse. Another belief is that the followers of Thomas Paine commissioned the construction of the monument. Paine wrote a book called The Age of Reason. You can find copies of it today, but they're all different lengths. Some have 164 pages, while others are only 100 pages long, and they all say that this is the original book. Either somebody has subtracted or added to the book over the years. Paine said that religions were manipulating the words of God to benefit themselves at the expense of people. In Common Sense, Paine opens his account with the contrast between society and government. Paine said that society is produced by our wants and government by our wickedness. The former promotes our happiness positively by uniting our affections, and the latter, that's government, negatively by restraining our vices. Society in every state is a blessing, but government, even in its best state, is but a necessary evil. Not too many people would argue with that today. Paine got sideways with the U.S. government when he exposed a bunch of politicians who had their hands in the cookie jar. Money being sent from France to fight King George and his army was winding up in people's personal stashes instead of going to the army. Soldiers were starving to death while others were becoming rich. Some things just never change. Paine eventually got thrown out of the country. He spent time in prison for backing the wrong group after the French Revolution. Eventually, he managed to be allowed back into the United States, and he died in New York in 1809. There are several Thomas Paine societies scattered about the planet. Most have only been around for a few decades after the Guidestones had already been built. There could have been some unknown group who aligned themselves with his ideas that decided to put his thoughts, although somewhat translated, in stone. The Georgia Guidestones consisted of 4 tall granite slabs, a centerpiece of equal height, and a capstone that sat atop all 5 stones. The 4 granite slabs are each 16 feet 4 inches tall, and they're 6 feet 6 inches wide and 1 foot 7 inches thick. They each weigh about 20 tons. The capstone weighs 25,000 pounds. There are sometimes referred to as the American Stonehenge because of their shape and dimensions. Richard C. Christian had a few specifications he requested in the stones. They were to be notched and have holes in them that would allow for the structure to act as a compass and a calendar. The sun shines through a hole in the capstone, and it shows what day it is on the centerpiece every day at noon. The North Star is visible through a slot in the center stone. There are also other ways to track the movements of the stars and the sun. Astronomical phenomena were also associated with the Guidestones. The 4 large upright granite slabs that composed the face of the structure were oriented to the limits of the moon's migration during the course of the year. An eye-level oblique hole drilled in the gnomon stone looks upwards towards the celestial heavens and is oriented with Polaris, or the North Star. Here comes another cat wanting to get in on the show. In the middle of the gnomon stone was a large slot with a hole cut through the granite, orienting the monument with summer and winter solstices. The Guidestones also acted as an enormous sundial. A drill through the capstone was a 7/8-inch hole, which allowed sunlight to shine on the southern face of the gnomon stone at noon. that there is chance. I have tried keeping them out of the office. If I close the door, they sit at the door and holler and scream and beat on the door and make a lot of noise. And hey, Art Bell had a cat that got up under his desk one night while he was broadcasting, and it messed with a bunch of the wires. And all of a sudden, a high-pitched hum started coming in over the radio. And of course, Art is trying to do the show, and being a professional, he's talking into the mic while trying to reach up under the desk and fix the wiring. And finally, he elected to close the door to his office and not allow his cats in while he was broadcasting. Well, the cats would holler and scream at the door and beat on it, and they made more noise than they did when they were in the office. But if you don't like cats, well, too bad. Anyway, getting back to the story. Now I've completely lost my place. Drilled through the capstone was a 7/8 inch hole, which allowed sunlight to shine on the southern face of the genome stone at noon. The 4 outer stones are positioned to mark the lines of the 18.6-year lunar declination cycle. Somebody had to sit down and figure all this out, and this was before they used computers a lot. These functions obviously give the monument a decidedly ancient pagan feel. However, it's not the connection of many modern Christians regarding the Georgia Guidestones. The problem appears to be the 10 Commandments located on the 4 slabs of the capstone. Additionally, the capstone states, "Let these be guide stones to the age of reason," which is written in Greek, Sanskrit, hieroglyphics, and cuneiform. The reference to the age of reason is one of the things that got a lot of folks to connect the guide stones to Thomas Paine. The stones have the 10 Commandments, rules, or guides, depending on how you look at them. The text is in English, Swahili, Hebrew, Spanish, Russian, Arabic, Chinese, and Hindi. I wonder why it wasn't in German. Oh well. They didn't ask me. Today, about 16 million people speak Swahili, but not in the United States. I wonder why that language was chosen to appear on the Guidestones. Written in Egyptian hieroglyphics is just plain weird. Someone had to figure out how to use an ancient form of writing to produce modern concepts. And who in the world reads hieroglyphics besides Egyptologists? A Babylonian cuneiform has been linked to the Anunnaki, who may have manipulated early humans into becoming what we are today. This doesn't necessarily go against Christian teachings of God creating mankind. The Anunnaki were supposed to have messed with us after God had created us. Others say they actually created us in their image, as if the Anunnaki were gods. Seeing as no one knows where the Sumerians came from, no one knows who invented their writing form. Instead of saying, "Thou shalt not murder," once again the Guidestones said, "Maintain humanity under 500 million, guide reproduction wisely, unite humanity under a living language." That's something just before the Tower of Babel took place. "Rule passion, faith, tradition, and all things with tempered reason. Protect people and nations with fair laws. Let all nations rule internally." In other words, stop fighting each other over who's got the right idea on how to run things. "Avoid petty laws and useless officials." Now, that one I really like. It's the only one I really like, but I really like that idea. "Balance personal rights with social duties. Prize truth, beauty, love, seeking harmony with the infinite." Now, they never said what the infinite was. They didn't say with God. They didn't say with a higher power. They just said the infinite, whatever that is, and Be Not a Cancer on Earth, which a lot of recording artists really love that thing. They've mentioned it on songs. The meaning of the Georgia Guidestones is clear to some people. A group of people wanted to set forth their beliefs on the monument that could be viewed by the rest of humanity. It is obvious that their hope is that these beliefs are viewable for quite some time. This is actually quite common practice and not mysterious of itself. However, not knowing who these beliefs belong to makes quite a lot of people uneasy. If I have a good idea, I'd kind of like to get some of the credit for it. I'll try to come up with some improving idea in the next few years. Something that people will go, wow, I wished I'd thought of that. I'm working on it. Being open minded is a big part of living in a free society. I don't care who or how my neighbors worship. I don't even care if they're atheists. I make an effort to walk around and visit my neighbors on all sides. If they are in need, we try to help out. Back during the Black Plague of 2020, we did limit our help to those within a few hundred yards of our home. Then we encouraged others to do the same, hoping that this would balloon out in all directions. Spending thousands of dollars on a huge monument telling the world how to act, someone should have stepped up and identified who they were. By keeping it secret, they only drew more distrust and trepidation to their words. Over the last 42 years, people have read all kinds of things into what the Guidestones say. Seeing the very first one tells us to maintain the world population below 500 million is very disturbing to a lot of people. Why put it first? If you're looking at the stones from several feet away, the top line was nearly indecipherable. If you stand right up close and look up towards the top of the stone, you just about couldn't read the first line. Is this why the most disturbing line is at the very top of the stones? Others suspected that Ted Turner financed the project. Since Ted Turner of CNN fame is located only 100 miles away in Atlanta, Georgia, and since many of his stated globalist goals reflect the message of the Georgia Guidestones, it has also been suggested that he is the mystery patron behind the giant granite slabs. Had Ted paid for the Guidestones, I think he would have said something eventually. His ego is huge, and he would want to be known for this massive structure. Turner invented CNN, the worst 24-hour news network in the history of terrible news. He has a reputation for trying to meddle in world affairs as if he somehow has figured out how to run the planet while his companies are all struggling to stay out of bankruptcy court. If you can't run a company, I don't think you can run the world. He sounds like the kind of person who would put his pronouncements in stone, but he would probably want the world to know that he had come up with them. In his film Endgame, Blueprint for Global Enslavement, Alex Jones said the Guidestones represented a genocidal depopulation program sponsored by the world's financial elites. A lot of folks have issues with Alex. He can be somewhat and sometimes, he can be very abrasive. If you've never listened to him talk, he can drive you away real quick if you don't pay attention to what he's saying and not how he's saying it. A lot of folks have issues with the man, like I said. He has never found a conspiracy that he doesn't like. Well, neither have I. How odd. I'm the same way. Conspiracy theories should really be called predictions of things to come. Alex Jones has been right more than he's been wrong. He didn't predict 9/11 exactly, but he did say there was going to be a false flag and they were going to blame Osama. Whoops, that was a slip. Osama bin Laden. It happened 2 months before 9/11. Alex Jones called out Epstein's sex crimes and the secret island many years before it made the news. A Jones documentary, Endgame, made 15 years, came to a conclusion that in 2020, a virus pandemic, real or fake, would be used to consolidate government into a UN-controlled world government that will enslave humanity into a technocracy. He was right about the pedophile sex rings with the elites of the world being involved. Alex Jones used to talk about weather manipulation. Years ago, the boys in the white lab coats said they were doing things to control the weather. I remember hearing it on the news. They were using silver iodide. I remember long ago they talked about seeding clouds with this substance. We never heard whether or not it worked. They said they were doing it, and then they stopped talking about it. People just all assumed that weather was something you couldn't control. Silver iodide was first used to augment a hurricane in Georgia that was reported in the news. Then, rain clouds were seeded during the Vietnam War. It rained so hard that it washed out a bridge. All of this was done years ago using old technology. The lie of man-made global warming or cooling, or warming or cooling, which is now called climate change because they couldn't decide if it was getting hotter or colder, is being pushed when man-made weather has purposefully been hidden from the average person. They say we are causing weather to change, while at the same time they're saying that weather can't be changed. Jones is batting a far better average than Ed Dames. Now, some of y'all will remember him. Ed Dames was also known as Major Doom. He was a retired U.S. Army major who said he was trained by Ingo Swann as a remote viewer in Project Stargate. Dames would come on Coast to Coast a lot, telling about some coming disaster, something that he had seen, something he was predicting, and he was usually wrong. Jones, on the other hand, has almost always been right, no matter how crazy his predictions or his research has led him. What he says a lot of times is what's known as actionable material. Another conspiracy theorist, Van Smith, says the Guidestones were a pet project of a white supremacist group out of Iowa who sought to establish a totalitarian one-world government. He also says that encoded in the Guidestones structure is the numerical value in feet of Dubai's Burj Khalifa, the world's tallest building. He says this proves that the planners intended the Burj Khalifa to be the new Tower of Babel that would usher in a dawning of a new era in which man can become God. Because the type of granite used to build the Guidestones is called pyramid blue, and the granite comes from the pyramid quarries, some conspiracists have said the Guidestones are part of an elaborate Masonic conspiracy to control the world. The Masons have been blamed from everything from the American Revolution to the price of gas. Being a secret organization, we don't know what they may be doing. The Guidestones just seem a bit out of their spectrum of ideas. If the Masons were doing something, I'm sure it would be a lot more organized and better maintained, simply because those folks do it that way. They're not sloppy in what they do. I never got around to going to see the Guidestones. It was on my list of things to do, but it was way down at the bottom. People I know who did visit came away saying that the place felt evil. These weren't into conspiracies or even the paranormal necessarily. Some of these were just folks that I knew or folks that I talked to. They were driving by, and it's like, oh, look, let's stop and get a photo at the Georgia Guidestones. Once standing in the shadow of this huge monument, they said the air became oppressive. They felt as if they were being looked at, and not just by the security cameras. They said the air felt heavy, and they became nervous. They all said they were in a big hurry to leave almost as soon as they had stopped. Others said the stones were just something to look at, interesting yet uninspiring. In 2005, Mark Dice wrote a book called The Resistance Manifesto using the pen name John Carter. This may have been a reference to the movie Terminator, since John Carter was one of the characters. Dice demanded that the Guidestones be smashed into a million pieces. He said that the monument has deep satanic origins, a stance that has earned him plenty of coverage both in print and on his website. According to Dice, Christian was a high-ranking member of a Luciferian secret society at the forefront of the New World Order. He said the elites are planning to develop successful life extension technology in the next few decades that will nearly stop the aging process. They fear that with the current population of Earth so high, the masses will be using resources that the elites want for themselves. The Guidestones are the New World Order's 10 Commandments. They're also a way for the elites to get a laugh at the expense of the uninformed masses, that's you and I, as their agenda stands as clear as day and the zombies don't even notice. That's what Dice had to say. Jay Weidner, a former Seattle radio commentator turned conspiracy hunter, has a theory about the purpose of the Guidestones. An authority on Hermetic and alchemical traditions that spawned the Rosicrucians, he believes that for generations the group has been passing down knowledge of a solar cycle that climaxes every 13,000 years. During this culmination, outsized coronal mass ejections are supposed to devastate the Earth. That's huge solar flares. Meanwhile, the shadowy organization behind the Guidestones is now orchestrating a planetary chaos. Weidner believes that began with the recent collapse of the U.S. financial system and will result eventually in major disruption of oil and food supplies, kind of like what's happening today. Mass riots and ethnic wars worldwide, like what's happening today, all leading up to the big event on December 21st, 2012. They wanted to get the population down, Weidner said, and this is what they think will do it. The Guidestones are there to instruct the survivors. Well, December 21st, 2012 came and went. A big part of my world did collapse when Scholar's Coffee Shop closed. Yes, I still drive by every once in a while and I look at that building hoping to see a sign up in the window that says Scholar's Coffee Shop. Something like in a time slip. If I ever do see that... My cat's at it again. If I ever do see that sign, I'm going to stop and I'm going to go inside and see what happens. Yikes. In 2008, the stones were defaced with polyethylene paint and graffiti with slogans such as "Death to the New World Order." I've seen young folks, 18 to 25, running around with t shirts proclaiming their allegiance to the New World Order. They think it will be some kind of utopia instead of a scene out of Animal Farm. It's September 2009. The Georgia Guidestones got a little stranger with the secret addition of a new 6 by 6 by 6 stone cube that was fitted into a notch at the top of one of the granite slabs. You heard that right, 666. The cube bore several inscriptions, including the numbers 20 and 14, setting conspiracy theorists above trying to decipher the meaning of this. Some thought this was a reference to Revelations 20:14, talking about the lake of fire, the second death. The first death is physical. Upon death, the soul is separated from the body, and the unbeliever continues to be separated from God. At the second death, the resurrected body is joined to the soul, and both are separated from God for all of eternity. Others looked at John 20:14, which says, "When she," this would be Mary, "had thus said, as soon as the words were out of her mouth, before she could have an answer from the angels, she turned herself back, perceiving, either by the looks and gestures of one of the angels or by hearing a noise, that someone was behind her, and saw Jesus standing there. But she did not know who he was." Now, some Bible verses are hard to connect to the Georgia Guidestones, but that's what folks believe. In the Bible, the number 14 represents deliverance or salvation. Whoever put that block of granite on the monument, they should have given us a little more info as to what it meant. Many people believe who study and keep an eye on the Guidestones saw this as some kind of a coded message to the Illuminati or the Masons or the Satanists or other secret groups that it was time to attack or hide or do something, whatever it was they were about to do. 2009, a man stole this 6-inch cube of granite from the top of one of the Guidestones. There was now a small notch at the top of one of the Guidestone monoliths. That summer, a new cube suddenly appeared in the hole, featuring numbers and letters carved on it. There was MM, JAM, 16, 8, 20, and 14. The caretaker of the Guidestones removed this cube and broke it into small pieces with a hammer as people stood around and watched. He then handed the onlookers little bits and pieces of this stone cube. Many new theories sprang up using numerology and other esoteric disciplines to draw links between the Guidestones and all sorts of things, like the TV show The Simpsons and a children's book called Curious George, the September 11th attacks, and the current outbreak of Ebola, which was from a few years ago. 4 years after this cube was removed, the police arrested a man named William Jeremy Ellis. He was trying to put the cube back in place. Apparently he'd climb up a ladder and he was trying to shove the cube back into the hole where he had removed it. He said that he didn't want the weight anymore. I tried to find out what he meant by not wanting the weight, but I couldn't find any references to it. I couldn't find the transcripts of the trial or anything like that. September 2014, an employee of the Elbert County Maintenance Department contacted the FBI when the stones were vandalized with graffiti that said, "I am Isis, goddess of love." On September 29th, 2021, somebody spray painted the Guidestones. The person or people wrote, "The elites want to kill 80% of us." A lot of folks said the spray paint was a good start and the stones should be torn down. As people were attacking the monument on a regular basis, the authorities put up some security cameras. The first batch were just cameras with no actual feed to a monitor. Some people stole the cameras, so the authorities decided they'd put in real security cameras with actual electric feed. I've got a cat cleaning himself behind my camera, and he's wiggling up against the... If I move him, he'll just come back. And Wednesday, July 6th, 2022, at approximately 4 o'clock in the morning, a sudden explosion destroyed one of the Georgia Guidestones' 5 tablets, and it damaged some of the others. As a result, the remaining parts of the structure were knocked down with bulldozers, and everything was removed for safety purposes. No motive, no suspect has been identified, and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation said that they were on the case. At 5:15 p.m., the rest of the monument was torn down and hauled away. The authorities had everything removed. What about the investigation? Whenever there's a bomb or something that goes off, you got to collect samples and take pictures and do an investigation, and then you've got the trial and evidence, and, well, they just packed everything up and took it away. Somebody set off a huge explosion, and everything was removed 13 hours later. One person who watched the video said that the explosion looked like a shaped charge. This person was a bomb technician in the Army. There was supposed to have been a time capsule buried near the Guidestones. There was a tablet erected that claimed that the time capsule was buried under the table, and that the time capsule was supposed to be opened on a certain date. Once the Guidestones were no longer there, the authorities went looking for the time capsule, and then they announced there was none. I would have been surprised had they said, "Oh, look, we've found the time capsule, and here's what's in it." The time capsule may have some explanation as to who built the monument and why. There should have been some interesting information in this vault that they say never existed. Darn cats are now fighting behind the camera. Come on, both y'all. It's Neptune again. And Snowball is back there too, but I can't reach her. There are a few websites that say that the time capsule was opened and it had a Peterbilt truck emblem, a 1979 Playboy magazine with Burt Reynolds' autograph, a copy of a Saturday Night Fever 8-track tape, and a bottle with 1,300 Quaaludes. I say nay, nay. If anyone had spent the guesstimated $100,000 to erect the stones, that would be $363,000 in today's money, they would have placed something of value in the time capsule. The folks building the monument were not a bunch of jokers. They were serious workers with a job to do. Why place a stone saying there's a time capsule if there's nothing there? Either somebody dug up the time capsule long ago, before the security cameras were in place, or the authorities took it and turned it over to the folks in charge of the Guidestones. Would they do such a thing? Remember the golden rule. The folks with all the gold make all the rules. As for who blew it up, I would say maybe the folks who built the monument decided they had served their purpose and it was time to take them down. 42 years since the stones were erected. I don't think the Hitchhiker's Guide had anything to do with the Guidestones, but 42 is an interesting number. If you add up all the numbers on the sides of a dice, it equals 21. You have 2 dice, you have 42. In numerology, 42 is a nurturing number primarily focused on individuals, family, and community. In the Bible, the number 42 is derived from its direct connection to the coming of the Antichrist. Revelations 13 states that the end of times the beast's power will be powerful, that no one will be able to make war with him. He will speak boastful things and receive authority to do almost anything he wants for 42 months. A 42 is made up of 6 times 7, showing a link between mankind and God's Spirit and a Antichrist in Jesus Christ. Then again, maybe somebody took it upon themselves to do what many had been calling for the last 42 years. One thing is sure, there's been a lot of attention paid to the Guidestones over the last couple of weeks. More people have heard about the Guidestones since the bomb went off than since it was put up. If you find this show interesting, I'm glad I did a good job. Let me see if I can get that cat again. I don't know what it is, but they follow me around and mess with anything I'm doing. The reason I call him Neptune is he went swimming in the toilet one day when he was a lot smaller. And I was going to call him Jacques Cousteau, but I couldn't spell Jacques, so I call him Neptune. Anyway, if you enjoyed the show, let your friends know. Let them know what they're missing. If you'd like to get one of my books, you can find everything at Amazon.com. You want a t-shirt, it's tpublic.com. If you just want to listen to the rest of my shows, which are all free, you can find over 300 shows on iHeartRadio. You can also find my videos on YouTube, which I'm still wondering why anybody would want to look at me talking. And for one or two of you out there that have been following my... I've got a Dalek in the room. For one or two of you all out there that have been following my terrible story with my truck, I finally got it back. It only took 105 days. They couldn't find the parts. They couldn't find the bits and pieces to put the motor back together. 105 days without my truck. But it's back. Until next Saturday, this is Chris James and all my cats for Strange Things. And next week, I'm probably going to lock them all out of the office.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, they say murder 3? Strange things that happen here, no stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.